Have you ever heard from people while you're pregnant that you shouldn't eat cheese? Have you gotten some unsolicited advice from people that are like, hey, you know what? You can't have any cheese during pregnancy. Have you ever wondered what is true regarding eating cheese in pregnancy? It can be such a confusing topic, so let's talk about it. Welcome to the Dr. Lexi Show, where I break down pregnancy topics into simple terms to help you advocate for yourself and your pregnancy. I'm Dr. Lexi, a board-certified OBGYN and maternal fetal medicine specialist, which just means a high-risk pregnancy doctor, and today we're talking about what's the deal with cheese. So before we dive into this topic and go into cheese and what you can and can't or shouldn't eat during pregnancy with regard to cheese, I want to make sure you know about your download that is free. Just go to drlexihill.com/advocate, and this will help you to receive a handout regarding the 13 questions that you can ask your OB provider. So I wanted to start today with a little bit of a story. So I was on a plane not long ago, and I received a tiny box with some snacks in it. And you don't really get snacks that much anymore on planes. And I had a tiny wedge of cheese in there. And it had this beautiful, cute little wrapper on it that was foil. And on the front, it said Swiss cheese. And I turned it over on the back to look at the ingredients. And the first ingredient was aged cheddar cheese. So now I'm super confused. Is this Swiss cheese? Is this cheddar cheese? I have no idea. But it made me want to look even further into if there was any information whether this cheese was pasteurized or non-pasteurized, because that's what we're going to get into today when we start to expand our knowledge surrounding cheese in pregnancy. And actually, the cheese, right after the first ingredient said aged cheddar cheese, it said in parentheses pasteurized. And that was super important to me. So as I'm on this flight and thinking about, what would a pregnant individual do? Like, if I were here and pregnant, could I eat this cheese? And it clearly said pasteurized. So that was nice and helpful. So we're going to totally talk about the difference between pasteurized and unpasteurized. The other thing with ingredients too, if you don't know, the first ingredient is the one that makes up the most of that food. So at least it's good to know that in the cheese, the first ingredient was cheese, but it was super interesting that it was a totally different type of cheese that I anticipated. So neither here nor there. So now we're going to try to dive into expanding our knowledge. And I want to start with some questions so that we can answer those questions and learn a little bit more about cheese during pregnancy. So the first thing I want to talk about is the reason that cheese intake is so important in pregnancy is because a cheese that is non-pasteurized or unpasteurized has the risk of containing a bacteria called Listeria. So what is Listeria? Listeria is a bacteria. It can be found in animals, it can be found in water, it can be found in the soil. And so cheeses, if they are unpasteurized, they have not yet undergone the heating process or the pasteurization process to increase the heat on the cheese, or what's making the cheese, right, the milk product, to kill the bacteria, specifically Listeria. And then they cool it back down to then put it into a nice pretty package and send it out to be sold. There are a lot of people that love unpasteurized cheeses because you get more flavor in those, because the pasteurization process might kill some of the good tasting flavor of a cheese. So that's where we get the expanding our knowledge. Number one, what is Listeria? It's a bacteria that can be in cheeses. Number two, why do we care about that now, right? Well, Listeria, if you ingest Listeria, you can get sick from that bacteria, like getting a food poisoning. And it's called listeriosis. Then the third question to this is why do we care about that, right? Why do we care if we ingest this bacteria, particularly while pregnant? The issue with it is it's not very common. We usually see about 2,500 cases per year, so it's rather rare. The problem is that pregnant individuals are kind of considered immunocompromised, so they have a higher risk of getting sick if they ingest Listeria or if they eat anything that has Listeria within it. So that's something that's really important to think about too. And then finally, I want to make sure we know if someone had Listeria poisoning, so listeriosis, that type of food poisoning, let's call it, what type of symptoms would you show? It would almost be flu-like symptoms. So think fever, chills, body aches, nausea, vomiting, maybe some diarrhea. So those are the symptoms associated with listeriosis. Okay, so we've learned a lot of terms now, right? Then we want to go into, now that we know a little bit of a background behind the cheese story and why it's so important to know pasteurized versus unpasteurized, what type of skills can we develop here? All right, so we're into our developing skills portion. So the skill I want to talk about first is learning how to read the labels. So if you have a cheese that has a label on it, try to refer to it and see if it lists information, whether it's pasteurized or unpasteurized. And remember, you want cheeses that have gone through that pasteurization process. All right, so that's thing number one. Thing number two here, what you want to do is, if you don't know if a cheese is pasteurized or unpasteurized, just don't eat it. Because if you're confused as to whether it's gone through this process, you don't want to put yourself or your pregnancy at risk. Thing number three, be aware that there are other foods, not just cheeses, that can have listeria in them. One of the more common ones you might have heard about is ice cream. So there have been quite a few little outbreaks of listeria here and there from ice cream, because it still is meant to go through the process of pasteurization. And even if it does, what if maybe the temperature didn't get high enough at one point and it was missed? There could be listeria, or that bacteria, that ends up getting packaged and being sent out and put in the grocery stores and then ends up in front of you when you're having that nightly ice cream. So just be aware of that. So if you want to check out anything with regard to food outbreaks, specifically for listeria, you can actually go on the CDC website, and I'll include a link for that below. They have beautiful tables that talk about, number one, what food had the outbreak. Was it an ice cream? Was it a cheese? Was it some type of a vegetable, right? Then number two, when did it happen? And then number three, the location where the outbreak was, main portions of the U.S. where it was seen or something like that. So those are really helpful to see as well. The other thing I want to mention is that there's a wonderful link for frequently asked questions regarding specifically listeria in pregnancy, and I'll include that below for you as well. The final item I kind of want to mention here with our developing skills is, now that you know the symptoms associated with being exposed to listeria and then having the concern for listeriosis, or the food poisoning associated with listeria, if you feel like you have any of those symptoms, please make sure to go get care immediately. Go into the hospital and alert your OB provider. Now, be aware that the symptoms of listeriosis might not show up for weeks. The incubation period is actually a bit longer than some other types of what we call food poisoning, quote unquote food poisoning. So be aware that it might happen weeks after you actually ate that cheese. All right. The other thing I want to mention a little bit here with developing our skills, there are some meats. People always talk about lunch meat, right? About not eating lunch meat. The question and the point with lunch meat is there could be listeria in lunch meat as well. So when you hear people talking about heating up their lunch meat, they're trying to ensure that there's a heat process there that gets high enough to kill this bacteria, this listeria, and then it can cool down and can be eaten. The one thing you'll hear about hot dogs is you want to make sure that they are above a certain temperature, and you want to make sure they're steaming. So if they're steaming hot, they should be above this temperature that's needed to kill the listeria. All right, we have expanded our knowledge, developed some skills. So let's talk about the impact that we are having from learning about this today, from watching this video. Number one, you're expanding your knowledge on the definitions surrounding the bacteria that's in cheeses. Then you're learning what cheeses are okay to eat and not okay to eat while you're pregnant. That then takes us down the road of avoiding that certain bacteria, which now you know you would be more vulnerable to being exposed to or being sick from because you're pregnant. And then if we're able to avoid the cheeses that have a higher risk of having that bacteria, you're decreasing the risks of getting any type of food poisoning that could cause you to get sick, that could cause things like preterm labor. So you're having a huge impact on your pregnancy by learning more about cheese and the information behind cheese while you're pregnant. So quick summary on everything today that I want to kind of break down into a couple of items for you. Number one, cheeses that are unpasteurized are not to be eaten in pregnancy. Cheeses that are pasteurized should be safer to eat in pregnancy. Number two, what cheeses are unpasteurized? Look at the labels always, but typically avoid cheeses such as Brie, Queso Fresco, and Feta. Those are some common ones that are unpasteurized. And then thing number 3, now that you know what Listeria is, watch out for any symptoms. If you're concerned you ate a cheese that may have been unpasteurized, and seek help immediately if you feel like you have any symptoms associated with listeriosis. Thanks for watching today, and don't forget to get your free download at drlexihill.com/advocate. Check out the website, drlexihill.com, and subscribe to the YouTube channel so that you can continue to see excellent information on pregnancy topics that I break down as best as I can. Also, leave any comments below from today's video that you'd like me to see and any other topics you'd like me to talk about in the future. I'm Dr. Lexi, and here's to a happy and healthy pregnancy.